The Sermon on the Mount is just one of the great, wonderful things that the Bible has given to us. We don't really know how much of the things that the Lord may have said at this time are recorded for us here. And there's not really a duplicate, but there is a very similar sermon called the Sermon on the Plain, which is recorded in the book of Luke. And many of the things that are contained in Matthew 5, 6, and 7 are also contained over there in the Gospel of Luke. The part that we want to talk about tonight has to do with the behavior, how I behave, how I treat people, what I do. And some of these things are very severe, as we'll see. And behind all of these things, Jesus is showing us that there is an attitude. There is a thought of heart that's very, very important. And so much of the time, and I don't know whether this is characteristic of our age or characteristic of the people that I'm associated with in churches of Christ, but so much of the time we emphasize the way things come off, how we act, what we do. We do this, and therefore we're good. And we sometimes don't give a great deal of emphasis to the motivation behind it. You can teach a monkey to do a whole lot of these things, and the monkey has no thought of being some kind of a worshiper or anything like that. But he can be taught to do these things. We can teach people to go through the motions without teaching them to go through the feelings and the thoughts and the attitudes of the heart. So I'm going to read a little bit from the Sermon on the Mount, and I want us to see something of the basis of these great thoughts that Jesus had, and he picked some pretty tough ones here. Beginning in the 5th chapter, beginning with the 21st verse. Look at what he says. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder. And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fires of hell. Boy, there's some heavy stuff there, folks. There's some things in that little paragraph that tell us something about who we ought to be and how we ought to act because of who we are. We are the children of God. We are God's representatives right here. Now, let's talk a little bit, though, about why is it wrong to kill? Why is it wrong to kill? Here's a person who does something against me. Why don't I have the right to kill him? Well, I understand it's against the law, but that's not really what I'm talking about right here. But then under certain other circumstances, it's okay to kill. If you're at war, we say, well, that's all right, you kill the enemy. That's the way wars are won, isn't it? And so this can turn out to be a very confusing thing if we don't understand something about what Jesus says about the heart. He says, first of all, that this comes from one of the 10 Commandments. He said, you have been told or you have been taught by people long ago, you shall not kill, you shall not commit murder. Now, by the way, there's a different word between killing and committing murder. The idea of committing murder is something that's done in cold blood. But the idea of killing, sometime, God had his people go into the land of Canaan, and they were told to kill the people, to destroy the people. So there's something very important here, I think, that we need to see about the difference between that and what Jesus is talking about here. So let's ask the question then again, why is it wrong to kill? There is a basic, very important reason. And it's found in the first chapter of Genesis when God created man. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And so there's something, no matter what your your station in life is, no matter where you are on the social ladder, no matter where you are in business or in politics or whatever it is, no matter what your ethnic background is, your color or anything like this at all, has nothing to do with this at all. You are created in the image of God. Now, if you want to find I even hate to say this, the dirtiest, lowest person that you can find anywhere on Skid Row or wherever it might be, you find him and you say, this is the worst person in the whole world. Christ died for him. He is valuable because he was created by God. What about Hitler? What about Mussolini? What about the terrible, terrible dictators that are all through history? Folks, Christ died so that they could be saved. Now, do I understand that? No. My mind is very narrow when it comes down to understanding why Christ died for some people. Some people maybe that you know, and some people maybe that are figures of history. But the reason that it's wrong to kill is that you and I and every human being is made in the image of God. You are and I am. We are made in the image of God. Now, what does this mean? I'm not sure that any of us will ever know exactly what that means, but it does seem to mean, well, there are some things about it that are obvious to us. It seems to mean something like this: God is spirit, and you are a being made up of spirit and flesh. And there's something about your spirit that is like God. It looks like him. It has his imprint on it. And when you do something to destroy that person, to kill that person, that is an insult not just to the person and his family, that's an insult to God. I have 4 children. People tell me about my youngest daughter, when she was a little girl, and she really looked so much like her dad. Well, I never did see the resemblance, fortunately, I think. But I never did see the resemblance, but I always appreciated when people said things like that, because she was in my image. And that made me very proud of myself, proud of her. And when God brought human beings into the world, he said, you look like me. And for someone to come along and kill that person, Jesus says that is a horrible thing. However, there's something behind the killing. What is it? Jesus says, you have heard what's said, don't kill. I'm telling you something else. Deal with the motive. Deal with the thoughts. I'll tell you, even if a person is angry, he's in danger. Now, that's kind of confusing here, because the Bible talks about God's anger, and God blesses anger numbers of times, especially in the Old Testament. You will find that over and over and over, that the people were very angry. What is he talking about here? He's talking about that anger that leads to murder, that anger that is revenge, that anger that is retaliation. And he says, that precedes the overt act of killing. And so the idea is not, well, I've never killed anybody, and I haven't. I've never killed anybody, so I'm in pretty good shape on this. How many times have I hated? How many times have I been angry been very, very angry for no cause? Well, there's another thing here in the next verse, the latter part of verse 22. He says, again, whoever or anyone who calls his brother or says to his brother, Raka. What is Raka? R-A-C-A. That It's an Aramaic word. And like I told you this morning, I don't know the Aramaic language, but I do know some words like this that come from the Aramaic. And the word rakah and the next word we'll get to here, fool, they have some kinship to each other in their meaning. Rakah means you are worthless. It is for the Jewish people who spoke the Aramaic language at that time, this was one of the most, and maybe the most severe insult that you could ever speak to a person about. So Jesus says, whoever calls his brother Rakah is answerable to the Sanhedrin. Now, this is an interesting thing, the way Jesus deals with this also. The Sanhedrin was the Jewish court. It was made up of 70 men. And these men formed the kind of the last court of appeals and so forth. And they were the ones who heard the severe cases. Jesus was tried before the Sanhedrin. So, what does he say here? This is not only a divine insult or an insult against the Creator, but it is also so severe that we will not put up with it in our nation. So you will be answerable to the courts so far as the Jews were concerned. You'll be answerable to the court for saying such a thing as this. It is so reprehensible. I'm all in favor of free speech, but I'm not in favor of abusive speech, and I'm not in favor of filthy speech. But free speech doesn't mean that I can say anything that I want to about anybody that I want to. And the reason is because every person is made in the image of God. And so the idea of why is it wrong to say to a person, you are a worthless individual. You are the scum of the earth. Why is it wrong to say that? Because that person in his spirit looks like God. So we need to show respect then. And now in the next statement he says, don't say you fool. Well, this was a very severe word in the days of Jesus. It's we use the word in a very different way than the way that those people used the word. It was very close akin in his meeting. It was very close akin to rakah. It was saying to a person, as a fool, you are a stupid blockhead. You're worthless. You're a stupid blockhead. You have no reasoning power. Get lost. Okay. And so it was a very strong word to them. Why is it right? Why is it wrong to call a person then a stupid blockhead, a fool? Because he's in the image of God. He's the child of God. He is the person who is made in God's image. And so Jesus says, don't insult the Heavenly Father by insulting his people. And so the Bible says a whole lot about the whole idea of respect for each other. One of the things that, maybe I ought not to say this at this time, but I'm going to say it anyway. One of the things that is so disgusting to me with politics is because of the way they tear each other down. They do not have respect for one another. At least that's the way it comes through so much of the time. And they accuse each other of so many terrible, terrible things. Well, whether it's true or not is not the point, but the Bible teaches we're to have respect for all of God's created beings, human beings. We are made in the image of God. Now, this seems to lead to something that is another group of things here that turn out to be very, very important. Jesus says in the beginning of the 23rd, 24th verses, he says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. It's kind of funny to me because people have applied that to the Lord's Supper. It has nothing to do with the Lord's Supper, folks, but it has all to do with worship. Worship. The offering of sacrifices was a symbol of the worship of the Jewish people. So, he has established the great worth of human beings. He has said to all human beings, you are worth so much. Not that you're worthy. Sin has made you unworthy, but you're worth so much. I am going to send my son to die for you because you are worth so much. And now he says, in view of that, have this respect for each other. You don't call each other fools. You don't call each other worthless, stupid blockheads and things like that. Why? Because that person is made in the image of God. That's the way it seems to flow. Well, so I've got something against my brother. We divorce worship from life so much of the time. We can lie, cheat, and steal in the business place. We can do all kinds of things in our life every day, but you want to be sure to come to church. And you want to be sure to have a reverential attitude and all this sort of thing, and the worship and so forth. And so worship, in some cases, had become kind of the cure-all for all of the rest of the wrongs that we do. And Jesus is showing that's not the case. Human relationships are so very, very important. They're vital. And Jesus says, don't overlook this fact. So if you are at worship, and that's the way we would say it today, if you're offering your gift at the altar, if you are at worship, and you remember, oh, my brother has something against me, what do I do? Jesus says there's something more important than worship here. I think you know me well enough to know that I believe that worship is a dynamic thing for Christians to take part in, but it is not a cure-all for our evils. It is not a substitute for the Christian life. And so he says, if you're offering your gift at the altar and you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there. I guess if we wanted to transpose this into contemporary life, we'd say, if you arrive at the church building just in time for the worship, just about the time the worship begins, you remember, oh, there's a real bad thing here between me and my brother. I'm going to ask God to forgive me of that during the worship here. Jesus says, hold on right there now. Leave your gift at the altar. Go and be reconciled to your brother, and then come and worship. Then there are two things that are mentioned here. I was talking to a man who was an elder in the church one time, and there was some very, very heavy criticism that came to him that came through other channels. And he found out about it, and it made him mad. And so I was not the preacher of the congregation, but I knew the man, and he said, if they've got something against me, let them come to me. Well, that's good. They ought to do that. But there's another statement over in the 18th chapter of Matthew in the 15th verse that says just the opposite. If your brother has sinned against you. So in one case he says, if you've got something against your brother, or if your brother has something against you, get it straightened out. That's more important even than worship, is going to be reconciled with your brother. So this is a very practical thing. And then it's not hanging over you all this time. It clears the air. It isn't the easy thing to do a lot of times. But it's the right thing to do. And it's the thing that clears the air and reforms a relationship. Let me just give you a personal experience. Years and years ago, many years ago, when I first started preaching, I was preaching for a congregation in Nashville while I was still a student at Lipscomb, and there was a couple there, and they quit coming to church. And I asked one of the elders, I said, where is this couple? And he said, oh, Jack, they got upset over something that you said that they took personally. And they thought that I was referring to something I had no reference to at all. And said they were upset, and they're not coming because of that. Well, that afternoon I went over to their home, and I spoke to them about the thing. And no, it was not an easy thing to do. I thought I'd get raked over the coals, for something that I had done or said or something, and come to find out that it was a total misunderstanding. And instead of that relationship being broken over a long period of time, it took only a few minutes, and we were totally reconciled to each other. Now, I'm not trying to say I'm the greatest or anything like that, but I am saying that's a concrete example of what can take place when we get things straightened out with the other fellow. And Jesus linked this to this whole idea of calling your brother a stupid blockhead, calling your brother a fool, or saying to your brother, raka. And so Jesus says the value of two people, both of whom are created in the image of God, the value of that relationship is sacred, folks. Families cannot get along very well if families break apart in reference to such things. She won't speak to me, so I'm not going to speak to her. That doesn't solve anything. It only aggravates. And yet that's the way some people seem to operate their lives. And then Jesus also says, and this will be the last one that I've got two more. Take that back. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Well, that's what you've been told. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. That's not an easy thing to do, is it? And if someone wants you to, if someone sues you and takes away your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Now, is this just a carte blanche thing that we can take in any circumstance? No. Jesus is not trying to tell us that it's wrong for us to defend ourselves or something like that. He's talking about retaliation. If someone slaps you on one cheek, Jesus says turn the other. This is not a self-righteous act. Jesus is saying you need to learn to be peacemakers. And by the way, he had just said something about being peacemakers just a little bit before he said this in the Beatitudes that we talked about 2 weeks ago. And so the whole idea of eye for eye and tooth for tooth is the idea of retaliation. And Jesus says no, it's just the opposite. Well, you know what happened in the 2nd century? Christians were severely persecuted, and there was something that stood out to the people of who were doing the persecuting. And they said, it's just kind of unbelievable. Look at the way these Christians love each other. And that was a true thing. Look at the way the Christians love each other. And Jesus said, if you love one another, that's the way that people will know about me. There are so many good, hard-down, practical things that are contained in these passages. So Jesus says, don't retaliate. Love. Love even your enemies. And that's going to be his next thing here. Love your enemies. So you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. You may be the sons of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Of those who love you, what reward do you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing more than others? So you see, we can measure ourselves by the way other people act. And Jesus says, you don't get anywhere with that, do you? We love people who love us. That's an easy thing to do. When someone really loves me, it's so much easier for me to love that person. But when somebody really doesn't like me, when somebody is really opposed to me, when somebody is even my enemy, Jesus says, love him. By the way, he doesn't say like him. He doesn't say like him. He says love him. The Greek people had a number of different words for the word, which are translated by our one word, love. And although I've mentioned this a number of times, it always comes up, and it's always very, very important. They had a word which they used, which is not even in the New Testament. It was the word eros, and that had to do with one's passions. There was another word, phileo, and this had to do with love within the family. And then there was one, agapao, which was a willed love. And the storge was another kind of a family type of love. And there were a number of different aspects of love in the minds of the people of the first century who spoke the Greek language. And so what is he saying here? And by the way, the word agapao is a word that is most frequently used in the Bible when it's translated love. Okay, what does it mean? It does not have to do with your emotions. It's not how you feel towards somebody. It isn't, I like her, I like him, I enjoy their company. It isn't that at all. It is this. It is a love which says, I want the best for that person. I don't like him. I don't like what he stands for. I don't agree with him. I can't stand to be with him. Okay, I've got him way down there. But I love him. And that's what Jesus is talking about, love for your enemies, is that idea that Christians need to develop the attitude toward other people that says, I want the best for you. No, not because I like you so much, not because you're beautiful, not because of any of these things, but because I'm a Christian, I want the best for you. And when Paul wrote the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, the love chapter of the Bible, as it's called, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not love, I'm becoming a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. That's agapao. And the Christian people transformed this word into agape. Agape was, they had a feast that they called a love feast in the latter part of the first century. A feast that they called a love feast, and it was called the agape. Because the relationship of these people, whether they liked them or not, was not the point. They always wanted the best for these people. And so Jesus says, love your enemies. Do good to those people who despitefully use you. And so Paul said, avenge not yourself, beloved, but rather give place for the wrath of God. For vengeance is mine, says the Lord, I will repay. So he says, if your enemy hungers, feed him. If he is athirst, give him to drink, because in so doing, you heap coals of fire on his head. Now, that isn't from the point of view of retaliation. It's from the point of view of learn to love people like Christ loved people. He didn't die for just the good folks. He died for the bad folks as well as the good folks. He died for the lowest person in the world. He died for the person who is the most evil of anybody you can imagine. He died for that person. And so that's the kind of love that he had. And he says, that's the kind of love that you need to have. What will that do for me so far as my life is concerned? Well, it can be a transforming thing in my life, because Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 says, love is patient, agape. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is long-suffering. Love is all of these things. It doesn't vaunt itself. It's not puffed up. It's not conceited. Doesn't behave itself in an unseemly way. You see, when we learn to love the way God loves, our whole life is transformed into something that we never dreamed it could be. You see, I like me. You might not like me. I like me. I like me. I want the best for me. Jesus says we need to learn to want the best for the other person. And so he says, love even your enemies. Well, the Sermon on the Mount deals in so many ways with so many of these things that are very, very practical. We're going to spend our Sunday evening lessons for the next few weeks. We're going to spend on parts of the Sermon on the Mount. And I hope that you'll find that not just interesting, but something that's very valuable to all of us.